Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 mini-series with the Seattle Mariners. And we have made it to the beginning of July in this 2027 season, our final season with the Mariners, as we're hoping the next patch for OOTP 25 is out tomorrow, and we're hoping to begin our long-term sim towards the end of next week or next weekend. It's been a good year so far for the Mariners, who are in win now mode. We have the best record in baseball. We're up 17 and a half games on the Angels as we try to win the AL West for a third time in 4 seasons in charge here. Doing pretty well with our ownership goals also at this point. And we went through in our last episode at the end of it some of the things that we might look to work on here as we approach the trade deadline, because we do have about $9 million to take on some contracts. The players who are currently on the trade block aren't particularly interesting for a good team like the Mariners, which is the top scoring team in the AL and has also allowed the fewest runs in the AL. So there's not obvious major holes to fill. Talked about potentially moving on from Gabe Spire, who has really lost a lot of velocity over the last 12 months or so, and is also not performing nearly as well on the field this season as he has in past years with us. If there's a big-time starter who's relatively cheap, we would look at that. Potential backup catcher to replace Tyler Stevenson, maybe something we'd think about. And if we could upgrade from Hunter Renfroe in a corner outfield spot, we'd do that too. I know you just kind of might be looking at the 2 stars with Hunter Renfroe and wondering why he's even on the roster. But we brought him on board a year ago to be a specialist against left-handed pitching for us. And he put up a 148 WRC plus a year ago. This season, he has certainly been much less effective. And he's also rapidly diminishing in terms of his skills in the field. So I don't think, since he's only playing against lefties regularly, we have to go crazy bringing on board someone to replace him. But he's also a DH only for us against lefties at this point because of his limited defensive skills. So I don't think that will be very hard for us to upgrade that position going forward. It's honestly conceivable that we might have a better player in our farm system, kind of a 4A free agent that we signed this past off season, who we may end up swapping for him in a month if we can't find something more interesting in the trade market. So I don't think we're going to be incredibly active in the trade market, but if we can add a left-handed reliever, that to me seems like the most obvious need. Unfortunately, there's not necessarily a great left-handed reliever out there, at least on the trading block. The most interesting to me is Steven Okert. Unfortunately, we only have average scouting accuracy on him, so we're going to get an updated scouting report before we decide one way or another with him. He's certainly performing much better this year than Spire is, but Okert also is a guy whose velocity is dropping off a bit over the course of this season. He's 35 years old. Doesn't look like it's going to be incredibly expensive to bring him on board, so I think even if he's not necessarily someone we'd want to build around for the long term, if he's an upgrade from Spire, that might be all we really need to decide to bring him on board. But he's not such a difference maker. I don't think that we're going to feel like we have to strike to bring him on board right now, concerned that some other team will pick him up. If somebody else trades for him, so be it. And we've simmed ahead one day, beat the Red Sox, which is always nice. Did get a midseason review from John Stanton. He says we're in a decent position to make the postseason. I guess he's got pretty high standards. We're up 18 and a half games in the division on July 2nd, and we have the best record in baseball. I consider that more than a decent position to make the postseason, but I guess he is someone who does not want to count his chickens before they are hatched. Happy with what Harry Ford's been doing at catcher for us. I think he's been good there as well. Pleased generally with what we're doing with the farm system. Not happy with what we've done with fan interest. This is something I've talked about a lot in the past. Did get some intel from viewers that it seems like with the new patch that's come out, it's working a little better than it has been, but we were an 86 fan interest team at the beginning of last season, went out and won 112 games, and our fan interest had dipped to the 81, 82 range. You can see we're at 82 right now, despite the fact that we're up 18 and a half games in our division. We have added 3 big-time players in free agency in the 3 off seasons that we've had with this team. Bo Bichette, Juan Soto, and Gleyber Torres. So we've added some very talented players, some of whom are also popular. So it seems a little harder right now to improve the fan interest metric, but I don't necessarily appreciate Mr. Stanton's feedback to me after I think we've done a pretty good job turning around his moribund franchise, but it is what it is. We're not going to be working for him after this season anyways, but hopefully we'll end up giving him a World Series trophy before we move on to greener pastures. And we've made it to the first-year player draft. We'll be picking 31st by virtue of that big season we had a year ago. Looks like the Tigers get a compensatory pick, which pushes us back even one more spot. Taking a look at the draft order, we will have a second pick in rapid fire after that, 35 overall. We got that pick as compensation when Lance McCullers Jr. Signed away from us this past offseason. So 31st and 35th will be our picks. Do like the way that this draft pool looks, at least in terms of potential compared to the first couple pools that we saw in this game. So I'm pretty hopeful that with the new patch that we'll be in a decent position for those fictional draft classes. It still seems, or I'm guessing, that the 2024, 2025, and maybe even to an extent the 2026 drafts maybe a little lower ceiling than I would like, particularly the next 2 with the real players who don't seem to be viewed very positively by the scouts at OOTP. But certainly a pretty deep-looking draft pool here, and I think we're going to have some interesting players to think about at 31 and 35. And we've simmed ahead to our first pick, and there's some pretty interesting players out there. Take a look at the 4 pitchers who are 4.5 or higher star potential, just to simplify things. Juan Gradeja, he's really a pure reliever, left-handed pitcher who looks like he could have outstanding stuff, but we're not going to take a reliever right at the top of the draft, so I think it's unlikely we'll go in that direction. Danny Almonte, maybe it's really Danny Almonte Jr., right-handed pitcher out of Dayton, Ohio, 17 years old, throwing in the 90s. Going to need to develop all 3 of those pitches. Think he can have pretty good stuff, plus movement, plus control. Decent stamina, not great at holding on runners. Not looking for a ton of money. I don't think I'd pick him right now if he's around in 4 picks, maybe. John Sanders is looking for big money. Guy who potentially has a 6-pitch arsenal. Realistically, it's probably a 4 or 5-pitch arsenal because it's questionable if that curveball will develop. And honestly, if it's only a 35, 40, 45 pitch, helps a little bit on the margin. But if that changeup in particular develops as high as we think it can, stuff could be really good movement, good control. Only thing I don't like about him is the $8 million bonus demand, which is well above slot at this point. Another pitching prospect, Lazaro Flores, a 19-year-old out of Henderson, Nevada. Another guy with a potential 6-pitch arsenal if everything works out well. Realistically, it's at least 3 because the splitter, the cutter, I mean, it's really at least 4. The splitter, the cutter, the fastball, and the curve are all pretty close to major league quality. If the change and the sinker develop, could have a real interesting arsenal. Decent stamina, decent at holding on runners, plus movement, really good control potentially. Only thing I don't like about him is that he's low leadership. He's a little older, 19-year-old out of junior college, who's only throwing in the low 90s, only faced a fair competition level at Grossmont College in beautiful El Cajon, California. But he's not looking for a ton of money. Signability is very easy. If he's around in 4 picks, I think he's a guy that we would seriously consider, but we may end up going with a batter here in our first pick. Josh Sheard, center fielder. Looks like he can be a pretty solid defensive outfielder, not necessarily great. Kind of solid at everything. Really nice home run power if he fully develops. Mike McQuaid. Little lower gap power, but potentially nice contact and home run power combo. He's a first baseman or a third baseman. Probably most likely a third baseman. Chase Bundridge, the last of the 4.5-star prospects. Center fielder, another guy with pretty good power, pretty average gap power and eye, decent contact. These 3 guys all have relatively similar profiles. Don't think I'd necessarily would jump at one of them with this 31st pick. So hoping that one of the higher ceiling prospects, according to our scout, piques my interest a bit more. Ken Hippolyte, center fielder, like the high leadership, loyalty, work ethic. He's got some pretty good speed, good range in the outfield, and a decent contact hitter with potentially really good eye, really good power, really good gap power, which will combine nicely with that speed. He should be slamming extra base hits, including home runs all over the field. Definitely my favorite prospect so far. A little older, almost 19 years old, but still think he's pretty interesting. And then Jim Davis, a 17-year-old. Rogers, Minnesota, but he ended up going to school in Scarborough, Maine. Another guy with high work ethic, decent corner outfielder, decent speed, but a potentially very interesting bat with that potential for 70 contact, really good gap power, good home run power. He's a left-handed hitter, while Hippolyte is a right-handed hitter, but those guys are two of certainly my 2 favorites. I'm going to spend some time offline looking at some of these other interesting prospects because there's a pretty deep pool here, and we'll let you know what we decide. Before I do that, scouting director recommends Hippolyte, and if we were to go with a pitcher, he recommends John Shoeless Sanders. I do like him as well. And spent a little time offline looking at this, but I don't think this one's that hard a decision for me. I really like Hippolyte. I'll call him Hippolyte. The contact is fine, and then the gap power, the power, and the eye are all potentially very good to borderline exceptional. Got some good personality traits. He's very fast, good range in the outfield, not looking for a ton of money. I think it's a pretty easy decision. Normally I do make the draft episodes cliffhangers, so to speak, where I kind of leave it open-ended and try to at least give viewers 12 to 24 hours to share thoughts with me before I do the next episode. But That's not going to be the case here, but if you do have thoughts on what you would have done in this draft, always interesting to hear them in the comments. But we're going to go with Ken Hippolyte here in the end of the first round, and in our supplemental first round pick, we'll see who's still available. And not surprisingly, a lot of the guys that we've talked about as far as position players, and even 3 of the 4 guys that we talked about as far as pitchers are around. Interestingly, the pitcher that our scout liked is the one that was picked. He recommends now that we go with Mike McQuaid, the third baseman. Certainly a pretty interesting contact and power combination with him. I do like Lazaro Flores. As I said, a little older. I don't love that he's only throwing in the low 90s and he's closing in on being 20 years old, so I don't think he's ever going to have incredible velocity. I do like the nickname, the Punisher. But I really like Jim Davis as well. I think those 2 5-star position player prospects were my 2 favorite guys. The fact that we can get both of them, a left-handed hitter or a right-handed hitter, pretty attractive combination. So we're going to go with Jim Davis here in the supplemental first-round pick and see who's around in round number 3. Maybe another one of these guys will linger. Interestingly, the Bundridge and Sheard are still around pitching-wise. Flores is still around. I've got some things that I don't like about him, but one of the things that I do like about him, even though he doesn't throw that hard, is that he's 19 years old and he's already got 4 pitches that aren't far off major league quality. Not looking for a ton of money, and we think he could be above average at everything. We'll take a flyer on him here in the second round. And you can see both Hippolyte and Davis, who looked like they were asking for a little less, are now demanding slot, which is fine. We had budgeted for that, but we'll limit our financial flexibility a little bit more with these 3rd, 4th, and 5th round picks. If we find someone that's way over slot, it'll be a little trickier to bring them on board. And our scout recommends we go with Chase Bundridge. We're going heavy with the outfielders in this draft, but as a 3rd round pick, a guy who we think could have above average contact and potentially borderline exceptional power, who's not looking for crazy money, is a pretty interesting pick to me. So we're going to go ahead and bring Bundridge on board here in the 3rd round. Moving on to our 4th round pick, and Josh Sheard is still out there. I think at this point we're probably going to pivot to something besides an outfielder. And we're going to pivot back to a pitcher in the 4th round, not someone we've talked about before. Art Adams, small right-hander, 5'9", 160. He is durable, doesn't throw incredibly hard, but think that his stuff and his control could both be above average, decent movement on his pitches, potentially a 4-pitch arsenal if everything works out. As a 4th round pick, not looking for a ton of money. Doesn't seem like a bad direction for us to go. The scout recommends Noah Malone, center fielder. I do not view his profile or his personality as attractive in any way, shape, or form. And in the 5th round, probably the last guy that we'll talk about before we blow through the next 15 rounds of this draft, relatively quickly offline. We're going to go with another outfielder, David Gaitan, center fielder. Think he could have an above-average bat, decent defensively, pretty good at sacrifice bunting, although interesting, he's horrible at bunting for a hit. That's kind of a strange combination to have. Switch hitter, think that he could be a pretty useful player. And for a fifth round pick to get someone who we think could be well above average in terms of both contact, power, and eye is a pretty interesting prospect. And we've simmed ahead a little more than a week since the draft concluded, and we're now at the All-Star break, taking a look at the standings, a 21-game lead in the AL West, 67-32 record, so that puts us up 8.5 games on the Orioles for the best record in the American League. Diamondbacks continue to have an excellent season. They are 2.5 behind us for the best record in baseball. Soto continues to have an outstanding season, remains second in the league in batting average, tied for first in home runs. I was going to say he's second because he's listed second, but he's actually tied for the league lead in home runs. He tries to lead the league in homers for the third time in the last 4 years for the non-power hitting Soto. And he's second in the league in ribbies, leading in OPS, second in batter WAR. Castillo and Wu, our number 5 starter, are first and second in the league in wins. Always interesting situation when your number 1 starter and your number 5 starter are the top 2 guys in the league in wins. Logan Gilbert leading the league in pitcher WAR. So we're still coming from a strong position of strength. We have dipped to second in the American League in runs scored, still first in runs allowed, and you can see we are first in every pitching and every defensive category in the American League except for strikeouts, where we rank 6th. We're in the top 5 in every offensive and or base running category, so still an excellent team. It's 67-32. We're actually a game below Pythagorean expectations. Taking a look at the All-Star Game rosters, would expect that we will see some of our players on the team. And Castillo, who's trying to be a repeat Cy Young Award winner, makes the team again, 14-4, 2.93 ERA. Logan Gilbert, 9-6, 2.72 ERA. Stopper Gregory Santos also on the team. He's 7-1, 7 saves, and an excellent 2.15 ERA over 67 innings pitched. So 3 pitchers on the All-Star team for our Mariners. Harry Ford, 13 homers, 39 ribbies, hitting just .232, but he makes his first All-Star team as a catcher. He was a Gold Glove winning first baseman for us a year ago when we still had Cal Raleigh as our starting catcher. No other no infielders make the team this year, so Ford makes it in his second season. Interestingly, our starting second baseman, Cole Young, who was a rookie last year along with Ford, made the All-Star team as a rookie. He is not a repeat award winner this year. Little surprise to see J-Rod and Juan Soto also on the All-Star team. Soto having another dominant year, 320 average, 28 homers, 72 ribbies. And J-Rod, despite missing some significant time, is having such an incredible season that he still made the team. It's really actually kind of impressive that he did. Only has played 36 games, but he's hitting .344 with a 190 WRC plus and a 3.1 WAR in that small sample size. And he made the All-Star team despite the injury issues that cost him most of the first half of the season. And we've simmed ahead another week. It's going to be put up or shut up time now for us on July 26th as far as potentially bringing on some help through the trade market. I've been monitoring things offline, haven't bothered you with the gory details, but there's certainly a much deeper pool of potential players for us to investigate than there were before. As we sit here on July 26th, 21 games up on the Angels in the division. We are 8.5 up on the Orioles for the best record in the AL. And those pesky Diamondbacks continue to linger. We're still 2.5 up on them for the best record in all of baseball. Soto having a monster season. He could win an MVP award this year. And Gilbert, Castillo, Wu continue to have great seasons for us on the mound. As I've talked about, we're going to find ourselves a left-handed pitcher these next few days. There is no doubt about that. Other than that, we don't really need much. When your number 5 starter is 13-2 with a 3.68 ERA, not a lot of improvements that you need to make. Again, since we're a win now team, if there's a big time starter out there who we can get for not all that much, I'll certainly investigate it, especially because we do see that Aaron Savale's stuff is starting to decline a bit. He's 32 years old now, and his velocity has really dropped a bit even over the course of this season. So I don't think it's necessarily urgent, given that he's still been pretty productive on the mound. Spire has actually been better of late as well. But I still think he's a guy that we would certainly consider upgrading, but not any obvious holes in terms of our pitching staff. And honestly, there's not too many holes in our lineup either. But if we can bring on someone who will increase our chance of holding the World Series trophy in late October or early November, we're certainly going to do it. And there are definitely some more interesting pitchers on the trading block than the last time I shared this information with you. Several lefties now, more starters. McClanahan has joined Montgomery. Shoto Imanaga also on the market as a lefty starter. And then there's a lot of lefty relievers still available. So we should definitely be able to bring someone on board who can help us on that front. I think the question is just whether we go higher end in the market and maybe try to bring on one of these lefty starters either instead or in addition to a lefty reliever. And Steven Okert, who we talked about at the end of our last episode, still on the trade block, still think he could help us, but I don't love the fact that similar to Spire, he's lost velocity this year, and he's also on the wrong side of 30. I think we're going to go with Jojo Romero. Really good stuff. His movement and control are only average, but he's got a nice 4-pitch arsenal as a left-handed pitcher in the final year of his contract, so it's not a long-term commitment. And over the course of his major league career, he's certainly been an above-average pitcher. Also, much more dominant against left-handed pitching than he is against right-handed batter, or left-handed batting than he is against right-handed batters. So that could potentially serve him well as a lefty specialist for us. And it doesn't look like they're looking for anything crazy for him. Still going to continue to investigate the likes of McClanahan, Montgomery, and Imanaga, as well as some of these other pitchers. You can see our former pitcher, Brennan Bernardino, on the market. He's been much better with the Yankees than he was with us this season and a half before we traded him away this past offseason in that Austin Wells trade. But right now, Romero and his really good stuff is what we're going to target. And we're basically going to get Romero for free. The Mets are willing to retain his entire contract if we give them Tristan McKenzie. We had signed him for depth in the pitching staff. He spent the whole year in AAA for us. 10-5 with a 4.55 ERA for Tacoma. So we're limiting our depth a bit if we do have some more injuries or some injuries in the rotation. But right now, we're not really necessarily as focused on depth, especially because we're only going to need 4 starters for the postseason. We want to bring on guys who will make our bullpen better, and I think Jojo Romero will certainly do that. So we're going to go ahead and complete the trade. Still got plenty of money to spend, so we can investigate some other options, but think that he will hopefully help stabilize our bullpen. And we've got another deal done. We're going to pick up Andrew Vaughn from the Mets for Jake Fraley, another guy who we signed to a minor league contract. Vaughn, right-handed hitting first baseman / corner outfielder. I think he could potentially be an upgrade from Hunter Renfroe. I think we're just going to stash him in AAA for now. He is a guy who still has 3 option years left. Although maybe we just move on from Renfroe immediately, because my thought is that either Andrew Vaughn or Lugo, who was our first baseman last year, who's been down in AAA learning how to play the corner outfield spots, will ultimately be a better right-handed bat for us at the major league level than Hunter Renfroe is at this point. And although Vaughn is certainly not an exceptional defensive outfielder by any stretch, he's still better than Renfroe at this point. And I think his productivity against left-handed pitching should be similar, if not better. So we're going to go ahead and complete that trade as well. And we're likely going to see if there's anyone who's willing to give us anything for Hunter Renfroe. Otherwise, we're probably just going to release him. And there's not really much of a market for Hunter Renfroe. A lot of older and very highly paid players are all we can get in return. But the Orioles will give us Dylan O'Ray, a 23-year-old center fielder. Don't necessarily see him being a big-time major leaguer. He's 23 years old, and he's hitting just 247 in AAA this year after he did hit 267 starting the year in AA. Hit 246 in a cup of coffee with Baltimore, presumably last September. Like his speed, like his eye, he's a good contact hitter, just not much power, but decent defensive outfielder. And he's also a guy who can play competent at several infield positions and also has a captain personality. So I don't think he helps us this year, but as a guy who maybe could help the team in future seasons, even if it's just when people have injuries. I think it's kind of interesting. It gets Renfroe off our books and opens up a spot for somebody else on the major league roster. Renfroe has gotten the batting average up to 269 against primarily against left-handed pitching, but only 1 homer and 93 at-bats, still a 76 WRC plus. As we've talked about, he can't really play the field anymore, no speed, and we're certainly not going to exercise that team option for $1.7 million next year. So the fact that we can just get that money off the books and get anything in return is attractive to me. And we've added Andrew Vaughn to the Major League roster. I noted that he did have 3 option years left, but he refused the assignment to AAA. So for the near term, that made our decision a little easier. Again, I think Lugo could eventually take his spot come September and come the postseason roster time. But I think he's a more well-balanced offensive player than Renfroe was at this point. And although he's certainly not exceptional defensively, if we have to play him in the field, he's a little more competent than Renfroe was. And given that we're a win-now team, and I know this is the last year that we're going to be playing with the Mariners, I'm going to make a win-now trade. I don't know that I would make this trade if I was playing the Mariners for the long term, because it's certainly expensive with what we're getting up. But we're going to bring on Pablo Lopez from the Mets to strengthen our bullpen. As good as Wu has been, he's a number 5 starter for a reason. And as good as Savale has been, I don't love the loss of his stuff and the lower velocity that he's been exhibiting. So Lopez is in the final year of his contract with the Mets, 8-7 with a 3.16 ERA this year. But a right-handed pitcher with plus stuff, plus control, and acceptable movement, ground ball tendencies, even though home runs allowed, he's only average. Think particularly playing in Seattle, he should do a good job keeping the ball in the ballpark with his tendencies. 5-pitch arsenal, a good, solid, proven major league starter who's been an above-average pitcher over the course of his career, gives us another big-time arm for the rotation, and also gives us a little more insurance if we do have some injuries. Hopefully we won't down the stretch. We have to give up Nick Enright, the former Rule 5 pick, who the last couple years has been bouncing between AAA Tacoma and the majors. But more importantly, we have to give up Luis Contreras, excellent prospect, number 57 prospect in baseball, someone we picked up as an international free agent signing about a year and a half ago. Really like him, like the speed, like the high work ethic, and a pretty interesting combination with good contact, good home run power, potentially good eye, and decent home run power if he completely develops. He's just started playing in rookie ball with our DSL team this year, hasn't done very well. My concern with him when we picked him up was just he's kind of a man without a position, but as I noted when we signed him, with that bat, I'm fine if he ends up a designated hitter, if that bat fully develops. Again, I don't know if we would have made this trade if I was playing this team for the long term, but given that the goal is to hopefully give the Mariners a World Series championship in our final year as general manager, we're going to go ahead and bring on Mr. Lopez, who will definitely bolster our rotation. And with Lopez on board, I think it's an embarrassment of riches in the rotation. Castillo, Kirby, Gilbert, Lopez, and Savale as our rotation. We're going to move Brian Wu into a setup role. That lets us move the recently acquired Jojo Romero into just a pure specialist role against left-handed pitching. We'll see what we want the bullpen to look like come playoff time, but I think we are certainly a stronger team now than we were at the start of the episode, which when you're in win now mode is kind of the point. And I don't know if the acquisition of Pablo Lopez was prescient or not, but George Kirby going to be out with ulnar nerve entrapment for about 2 months. So we should just about have him back in time for the playoffs if he recovers in line with our expectations. But feel better right now that we did make that move for some pitching help. Not that we're going to need it to get to the playoffs, given that we've got a 22-game lead on the Angels in the division right now. But we want to ensure that we have as much redundancy, flexibility, and quality as possible. And I think Lopez certainly does that for us. And we made it past the trade deadline. No other activity for our Mariners, so we are going to be running with what we brung at this point the rest of the way. 72-34 here on August 1st, 23 games up on the Angels in the division. The Angels well below 500. Every other team in the division is playing below 400 baseball at this point. Red Sox have gotten past the Orioles by percentage points for the second best record in the American League at this point, but we are 8.5 games up on both teams, so feeling pretty good about where we are in terms of the home field advantage throughout the AL playoffs. The Diamondbacks remain very good at 67-36, though. They've slipped to 3.5 behind us for the best record in baseball. So feeling like we're in a pretty good spot here. Just want to keep this team healthy over the last couple months of the season. Soto trying to make a run at a second consecutive American League MVP award. And Luis Castillo is also doing his best to ensure that he can win a second consecutive American League Cy Young Award. But as interesting as the potential individual awards are, it's really all about finally winning a World Series with this team. As we sit here on August 1st, we've had an over 700 winning percentage in 3 out of the 4 months this year. Somehow we were just barely above 500 in June. the 72-34 record right in line with Pythagorean expectations, playing over 600 ball against both lefty and righty pitchers, or starters more accurately. Second in the American League in runs scored, but we're still in the top 5 in every offensive category, and first in the American League in runs allowed. And other than strikeouts, we are in the top 2 of every pitching category and have a very good defensive team as well. So it's really just going to be a matter of keeping this team healthy down the stretch. Hopefully we'll have Kirby back for the playoffs. No guarantees there, of course, but the rest of the Major League team is healthy at this point. And we'll find out how we do in hopefully guiding this team to the best record in baseball and health for the playoffs in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.